I mean, it's actually not an entirely unreasonable position to say, guys, these sources are really late. They're put together in an atmosphere where people were fabricating stories like it was a sport, and I just don't trust this. I just don't trust this stuff. So I have to cast doubt upon them. That is entirely reasonable. But yeah, what do you do then, right? I mean, here are your options. One, you can. I mean, so notice if you go that route, then basically you've got this method that Muslims came up with. We have this method of isnad criticism, and this is how we get to the most reliable stories. Well, you get to that stuff, and Muslims want to throw that stuff out, right? So I don't believe that this is right. And so notice once you do that, then you're basically saying that the method that our scholars came up with is not reliable, and we've got all sorts of false stories that passes the criteria of our method, but which we still reject as false. Well, what other method do you have? The alternative method would be to take an approach that Western historians would take, right? Actual historians, right? There you would be looking at, various historical principles. You'd be looking at what are your earliest sources, what do you have that's multiply attested, that comes from, from different kinds of sources. Principle of embarrassment. So notice there they would say, the more embarrassing it is to your case, the more likely it is to be true. And the more favorable it is to your case, the more likely it is to be made up. And so they would be applying principles like that. But then all of a sudden, you have to grant the satanic verses. You have to grant all these different things. And so the alternative to one of those routes is just skepticism and just saying, we don't know. We don't know about our prophet. But then that's so notice you have a huge problem wherever you go. If you want to take the current Muslim sources and this methodology seriously, you got all kinds of moral problems with Muhammad. If you want to take the approach of a non-Muslim historian, you end up with all kinds of problems. If you reject either one of those approaches, looks like you're just stuck with skepticism and you can't know anything about your prophet, and don't tell us it's a true religion, and don't tell us that we should trust the Quran when all the people who are lying about your prophet are the ones who are preserving the Quran. So it's just you have a big mess here. From Three Idiots, very aptly named, Three Idiots says, David. So he's commenting on the principle of embarrassment. David, if Scripture has embarrassing statements is more authentic according to you, then why you throw away Gospel of Thomas, which portrays Jesus as misogynistic? Saying 114. Three Idiots, again, very appropriately named. One, you didn't understand the principle of embarrassment at all. Two, you definitely don't understand the Gospel of Thomas. And third, you Jesus being misogynistic was not embarrassing to the people who were writing the Gospel of Thomas, right? So one, the principle of embarrassment does not say, if something's embarrassing, it's as good as gold, right? I could say something embarrassing or insulting about Christianity or Islam or anything right now. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's historically valid, right? That's not the point. The point is, if you're looking at claims of the adherents of that religion, right? So if you're talking about Muslims sharing stories about Muhammad and claiming that they got this from Muhammad, or if you're talking about Christians, Jesus followers, making claims about Jesus, the historian looks at these and he says, well, if I have a story about Jesus or a story about Muhammad that's coming from the followers, well, if it's something really positive, I have to question that. It could be true. It could be totally true, but I have to think about what reason they would have to invent this, right? Because if they have a good reason to invent that, I might want to take a closer look and see maybe they invented this. If it's something really embarrassing to them and they're trying to explain it away, then that actually weighs in favor of authenticity, because if there's no good reason for someone to invent something, then, well, there's no reason to invent it. So you go back to the earliest strata of Islam. They're all saying that Muhammad received revelations from the devil. Muslims today, that never happened. Why? Because it's embarrassing. Guess what? It was embarrassing back then too. That's why they were trying to explain it away. They're trying to turn it into a positive direction. Well, guess what? It was clearly embarrassing to them. So if it's embarrassing, does it seem likely that they would have made it up? That they would have said, hey, you know what? Let's make up a story about Muhammad delivering revelations from the devil. No. It doesn't make sense for Muslims to invent it. If non-Muslims had invented it, it doesn't make sense that Muslims would have included this in their story. They would have said, what are you talking about? The only explanation for why this is in the Muslim sources is that they knew it happened, right? That's the only explanation. Whereas if you take something like Muhammad's miracle claims, we can have believable miracle claims. But when your earliest source, the Quran, says that Muhammad didn't perform miracles, and then the farther you go along, the more miracle claims you have, it's clear that people are making these things up and that they had a reason. Why? Because wherever they went and they said, Muhammad's a prophet, Christians and Jews would say, what miracles did he perform? And at first it was none, just the Quran. And Christians and Jews laughed that out of the room, right? But as time went on, more and more, oh yeah, he was shooting water out of his fingers when we were thirsty. It's all kinds of nonsense, right? So it's clear they had a reason to make that up. And there's no good reason to think that the historical Muhammad actually performed miracles. The earliest source actually denies it. And so that's how the principle of embarrassment is working. So there's that. Then there's the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is a forgery. No one thinks the Gospel of Thomas is authentic. No one thinks that Thomas sat down and wrote the Gospel of Thomas. It is a forgery, right? It's like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is even long after that, right? It's a forgery. People don't say, oh, the Gospel of Thomas contains something that we don't like and that we find embarrassing. Therefore, we're throwing it out. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas is thrown out because it is the most obvious forgery in all of history, apart from the Gospel of Barnabas.